So you may have heard of the ute tax, but the real name for that is the NVES, the New Vehicle Emission Scheme. In this video, I'm going to explain what the NVES is, how it works, are the government's claims about it true, and what does it mean for you and Australia? And I have a blog post where there will be more information and clarifications for this video. What is the NVES? Well, it's the New Vehicle Emission Standard, and in a sentence it means that every new vehicle sold has to meet a certain emission standard, and if it doesn't, the car maker needs to pay a penalty. So what problem does the NVES solve? Well, according to the government, it's to save Australians money on fuel, it's to provide more efficient vehicles, and it's to reduce CO2 emissions on new cars. Having read all the legislation, I actually think that the government really meant to write that in reverse order, but we're going to get to that. All right, so what actually is an emission? Well, greenhouse gases, CO2, carbon dioxide, trap heat from the atmosphere, contributing to global warming, and from a car exhaust there's all manner of pollutants such as carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and something called volatile organic matter. So we talk about it in weight. Well, every cubic metre of CO2 weighs about 2 kilograms. Air itself actually has a density of about 1.3, so that's where the weight of this emissions comes from. So let's look at the bigger picture. So here's all of Australia's emissions, and transport is about 17% of emissions. Light vehicles, this triangle part here, that's about 10%. So that's the area that we're looking at reducing. And many people will say, oh, but it's only 10%, whatever else, why bother? Well, if you're going to reduce anything, you've got to reduce it across the board. All of these sectors here, we just happen to be talking about this one for the moment. This is how the NVES works. It's important to understand this so you understand the impact. First of all, it applies to all vehicles below 4.5 tonnes GVM, which are categorised into Type 1 and Type 2. We're going to get onto that later because, again, that's a devil in the detail type thing. And then for each Type 1 and Type 2, there is a headline target, one for Type 1, one for Type 2. Example here is 210 grams of CO2 per kilometre. Then we go and we set a vehicle specific target, which is based on weight. There's a formula, etc. I put it on my website in the blog post. The example here we use is 213 grams as the target for a specific vehicle. Then we look at the actual emissions, which again in this example is 189, and then we do the calculation target versus actual. Well, 189 is less than the target, which is 213, so we're 24 under. So then when we come to this question, do we make the target? Is it a debit, is it a credit? Then we know the answer, we've actually got a credit. Now the government uses the term units, but we can think of it as debit and credit because it just makes sense. Now, the car maker itself needs to multiply that out for all of its vehicles. So if it's got 1,000 cars at -5, then that's minus 5,000. If it's got 4,000 cars at +10, that's plus 4,000. The total combined is minus 1,000. So then from there, is that positive or negative? If it's a negative, then you've got to pay up. And if it's a positive, well, you don't do anything, that's it, you've passed. Or you can use some of the positive vehicles to offset the negative vehicles, as you've seen in that calculation. So let's look at some examples. We're going to take Ranger 2 litre XLS dual cab 4x4, and that's a Type 2 vehicle, so it's got a target of 210. The actual weight, or the MIRO, mass in running order, pretty much the curb weight, 2247. The weight for the purposes of calculation is in this case the same. The actual emissions are 189. The specific target calculated, you can look at my website post and you can see exactly the calculation there. That comes out to 213. There's a difference, 213, 189. We are 24 to the good for 2025. Later years, we'll look at that in a moment. Ranger Wildtrak dual cab V6, similar calculations, weighs a bit more and consumes a bit more, so it's only 19 to the good. Whereas the LC300, let's take a look at that. Also a Type 2, its baseline target, headline target 210. Its weight is 2580. Now there's something called a break point, and what that means is that once you get above a certain weight, and in fact below a certain weight, that's sort of set at a maximum or minimum figure. So the calculation weight is 2400. We run that through and then we find that we are minus 17. debit as opposed to credit because it doesn't meet or doesn't manage to meet its target. So what does this actually mean in terms of dollar values? Well, here's some example vehicles. Now, the Ranger 2 litre, that was the example I just used, that's 24 a head. The Wildtrak V6, that is 19 a head. The 300 GXL, you have to pay $100 per gram over as a nominal penalty. However, there are ways to offset that. Will come into a moment. The Jimny gets absolutely slammed at 3,200. Why? Well, we're going to come on to the Type 1 versus Type 2 thing in a moment. The Toyota 86, all sports cars tend to get slammed. Why? Because they are not designed for fuel efficiency. They don't have low rolling resistance tyres, etc., etc. So that's more expensive. Mustang 4-cylinder. Now, you notice it's not going to end well for the V8, which is very heavy and its fuel consumption is pretty poor. So in 2025, that's 13,800. Remember, these are not necessarily price increases because when the penalty is incurred, there's few things the manufacturer can do. One, they can use offset. So say, okay, we've sold X many EVs, that cancels out the penalty from the V8s we're selling, therefore there's no price increase to carry on. Two, they could simply absorb the penalty, go, okay, the car's $5,000 more expensive, we'll just absorb that. Not sure I can see that happening, but it is a potential, right? They could just pass it on, which I think is the most likely thing. If we're going to pay $5,000 extra to the government, you, the consumer, are going to have to pay that. Or they could just go, you know what, no one's going to buy these cars now, demand is reduced, it's too expensive to keep on sale, we're just going to withdraw it. That's a very real possibility, I feel. Now, this is how it works over a fleet. So let's say that we've got, Ford is going to take some example numbers here, just for the purposes of demonstration. We're going to sell 8,000 2-litre Rangers. We're going to sell 5,000 Ranger V6s, a few Mustang V8s and some Mustang Mach-E's, which are the EV. Now, we multiply the emissions by the number of cars sold, so you can see that the Ranger 2 litre is in 2025 doing pretty well for us, brings us down to about minus 180,000. We add in the Ranger V6, that's about minus 80,000. By the time I multiply it out, the V8 does badly, it pushes it up, and the EV brings it down nicely as well because there's zero tailpipe emissions from an EV. So you've got to look at it from a cumulative perspective, and that looks like this. So we start off with the Ranger, all the way down to nearly minus 200,000. The V6 Ranger makes life a bit better. We add in the V8, that reduces it back a bit, and then we add in the EV, that makes it better again. So that's kind of the calculation car makers are going to have to do. Look at all the cars they've sold, minus or plus whether they've met the emissions target, and see where they come out at the end and how much money they need to pay the government as a result. All right, so here is the bad news. In fact, a lot of this is bad news, but this is a particularly bit of bad news. How the targets will change over time. Now, for Type 1 and Type 2, there's petrol and there's diesel. And the emissions are, the targets are expressed in CO2. You can roughly translate that to litres per 100, which is what I've done to make it more understandable. So in 2025, the target for Type 1 averaged across petrol and diesel is 5.7 litres to the 100 kilometres. For diesel, it's 8.5. And now you can see how the Rangers managed to just sort of sneak underneath that, especially when adjusted for weight. In 2026, that drops from 5.7 for Type 1, and this is the road cars, remember, to 4.7 and 7.3. It's starting to get tough now. 2027, 3.7 litres to the 100. Anything beyond that, your road car's going to get penalised, and that is a low target. Especially when you consider for the Type 2 cars, that's 6.1. Can you see a Ranger, a Hilux, an LC300 getting anywhere near 6.1? 2027, I don't think so, but you know what? We've got 2028 to go. 2.7 litres to the 100. Yep. 2.7 and 4.9 under 5 litres to the 100, and by 2029 it's 2.3 and 4.4. Like I say, you can go and convert the CO2 to the litres per 100 yourself and see what you get. And here's a nice graph. Those two are the Type 1s here, sorry, the Type 2s, and that's the Type 1, and you can see how much that goes down, 10 litres, 100, all the way down to 0 there. So essentially, as you can see, those targets get incredibly hard to beat. Let's take a look at what that means though. I mean, it's average 17% reduction per year on these, and there's no way petrol or diesel engines are going to be able to do that, which is literally the point of NVES, to force you into an EV. That's why these targets are so aggressive. And remember, these targets aren't anywhere near as aggressive as what some of the environmentalist groups were proposing. They wanted things about twice as harsh as that, but here we are. All right, so in 2026, I won't go through all the maths, it's you can look on my website for the detail there. What does that look like? So if we took these vehicles, what would that look like? Well, all of a sudden, because those targets have got harder, we've now got $600 worth of penalties for the Ranger 2 litre, $1,000 for the Wild Track, the LC300 is $4,100, and Mustang owners, you're sitting down for this, 10 grand. And 16, so you're going to get absolutely hammered. If you want a Mustang, buy one soon. All right, now let's jump across to 2029 and see what things look like. 7 grand for the Ranger 2 litre, 8 grand for the Wild Track V6, and then 11 and a half, 12, 15, 22,000. That's serious amounts of money. And of course, maybe these vehicles will get a bit more fuel efficient, maybe they'll go a little bit hybrid, but you know, they're not going to meet those targets at 2029. The only way to do it is EV. All right, so which car manufacturers will be affected? Well, I think broadly there's winners, maybes and losers. In the winners, unsurprisingly, it's the EV pure plays. If all you produce is an EV, you are going to be loving this legislation because it's going to make your cars relatively much cheaper than everyone else's, so that's going to be a bonus. The maybes, those are the vehicle manufacturers who do not have a strong reliance on four-wheel drives, utes, high emissions vehicles, sports cars, etc., and have a relatively strong hybrid or preferably EV lineup. Hyundai, I'm thinking there, Kia, Porsche and Audi starting to move that way as well. But there's a whole bunch of losers which is important to a lot of my audience, and the first one is pure four-wheel drives. Ineos, Ram, Fuso, because the Fuso Canter can be derated under 4.5 tons. Isuzu Ute, one example for the Canter might be to buy it at 6.5 tons and then derate it later on. I don't know, there's probably games you can play like that. Toyota, heavy four-wheel drive seller, they're going to hurt. Ford, really the Ford, Everest and Ranger company, they're going to be hurting as well. Mitsubishi, similarly, a lot of Triton sales there. And then the special vehicles as well, GM special vehicles, pretty much everything they do is going to get hit badly. Maserati, Aston Martin, Lamborghini, they're going to get hit, but they're probably high-end anyway. So that's essentially what I think will happen with the manufacturers. There's probably more examples. Please add them in the comments. Now, I said earlier on Type 1 versus Type 2 is important, and it is. So here's the actual legislation, and I've summarised it as saying essentially that is road cars, people movers and light off-roaders. Light off-roader, what is that? Well, stay tuned. Type 2 is utes, small trucks and heavy off-roaders. Again, that light heavy distinction. So let's take a look at that in more detail. There's the legislation, and this is what it means. To be a heavy off-roader, you must satisfy 3 criteria. 1, it must be an MC category vehicle. Now, do you remember a few years ago, I wrote a lot and about the MC category of the Everest and various other vehicles as well, and Ford actually capitulated and changed the vehicle's classification from MA to MC. Well, I bet all Everest owners are now really glad that happened, because this is exactly the sort of problem I had in mind. So for it to be a Type 2, it needs to be MC category, tows 3 tons and body on frame construction. So I'm going to give you 3 seconds to think of vehicles which are four-wheel drives which don't meet all 3 of these criteria. Can you think of them? There's one, Jeep Wrangler. That is MC, that is body on frame, but it doesn't tow 3 tons, therefore it's a Type 1 light off-roader. Suzuki Jimny, again, that can't tow 3 tons, so it's a light off-roader. Now that literally is a light off-roader, but the problem is it is an unaerodynamic four-wheel drive which has a poor fuel consumption, not helped by the fact Suzuki have given it a prehistoric engine and a transmission which I think Noah used to drive the Ark. Tank 300, same sort of thing, can't tow 3,000 kilograms, and pretty much every modern Land Rover is not a Type 2 because they are MC, they can often tow 3 tonnes plus, but they're not body on frame unless Land Rover wants to argue the point. So they are all Type 1, which is essentially subject to the road car emissions targets. Okay, so let's take a look at the government claims. Are they or are they not true? So, and this is all taken from the website. Would a new vehicle efficiency standard affect me? The claim basically is more choice of fuel efficient cars and fuel saving. My analysis is partially true. That is true. There will be more choice of fuel efficient cars and fuel saving, and that's a good thing. I applaud that. I'm on board with that. But what it ignores is the fact that that's only true for some people, and it's forcing people out of four-wheel drives and utes, etc., with nowhere to go, and the cost of them to buy their cars will go up. So a lot of people are going to be out of pocket as a result of this, whereas some people will be saving fuel. Will a standard impact my existing car? The short answer there is no. I disagree with that. I think that that's true, because what will happen is that if new cars get more expensive, then your existing car, the value of it will go up. Now, if you want to sell your car and then cycle, that's great news. But if you then want to buy another car, to me, that's only going to add to the cost of living pressure crisis we have at the moment. So I disagree with that. And I think that by increasing the price of new cars, the price of second-hand cars will go up. And we just saw that in COVID. Here we go. Will a standard increase the price of cars? Claim no. I disagree with that, because adding a tax to the price of the cars will increase it. Now, the government in their consultation paper actually did cite some data for this to prove the point by saying it hasn't increased the price elsewhere. I followed that link, and here is what I found. So this is the actual graph that they cited from their consultation paper, 2023 study, etc. So I just draw you to the headline bits. All of these lines here represent compact SUVs, large SUVs, etc. And they're all going down, particularly when you multiply by volume, with the exception of 2, which is the pink line here. That's large SUVs, which has gone up, as you would expect, because we're trying to get people into EVs, etc. And the orange one, which is pickups, which has also gone up, all have gone down. But yes, you can say the net result is a price decrease, but if you need these particular cars, then as you can see, it's gone up. And I think that's actually a misleading claim to make, because it just glosses over the detail. But there you have it. You can look it up for yourself as well. Will I still be able to buy a ute or four-wheel drive that will tow my trailer and boat? Do you hear that dog whistle? Yes, you can still buy four-wheel drives. Is this true or not? Partially true. Yes, you can. I can't disagree with that. But it's kind of a lie by omission, because they will be more expensive, and they may well be an electric vehicle which might not. Didn't say how far you can tow it. So, you know, I've really got a problem with these statements here. They're just not showing you the big picture, and that distresses me. Will a standard ban new vehicle models? No claim, no cars are banned. Well, again, no cars are banned, that's true, but if you just price them out of the market, then that's not a ban per se. It's a little bit like saying, look, you don't have to go through this airport security scanner, you don't have to, but if you don't, you're not going to get on the flight. It's kind of that sort of logic here. So again, I really just don't feel that's accurate. I would love to hear from people in remote and regional areas on this one. Regional people save fuel money. That is their claim. Partially true. Yes, if you have a more efficient vehicle, you will save fuel money. I can't argue with that. But this ignores the fact that your vehicle, if it is not an EV into very short, medium term, medium long term, will cost you more, and that may well outweigh the extra saving you get from fuel. So I disagree with that. And also fast charging as well. If you're doing long distances, you're going to want to fast charge. That's not going to be good for your battery long term, and fast charging can cost quite a bit, much more than solar at your home. We're not there yet. Claim, Is this standard just about electric vehicles? They say, no, it's not just about electric vehicles. And I'd say that's partially true, but the only way to meet these standards is electric vehicles or hydrogen, because we are measuring tailpipe emissions. But I have a bit of evidence to say that I don't agree that the standard is just about electric vehicles. And this is from the government's own consultation paper. And I draw your attention to what they say here. They say, one of the principles is ensure equitable access to the vehicles Australians need for work and leisure. So in other words, what all Australians have a need for different types of vehicles, let's make sure they can get those vehicles. I'm on board with that. That is beautiful. I love it. Absolute tick. But this is the analysis of the 4 options that they had at the time. Let's see what it says. Reduced access to EVs, advanced ICE and hybrids, reduced access to EVs, improved access to EVs, potential withdrawal, more access to EVs, etc. And then this principle over here, enabling vehicles with the best emissions and safety technology to be available to Australians. Again, totally on board with that, agree. As good or better than is available internationally. Yep. I think we can all give that one a tick. What does it actually talk about? Reduced access to EVs, reduced access to EVs, improved access to EVs. This is the only box that doesn't specifically mention EVs, as opposed, what it does mention is low and zero emission vehicles, which is better because EVs are one type of low and emission vehicles. So it's hard for me to swallow the fact that this isn't a push towards EVs when we have this sort of stuff in here, and the targets are impossible to meet unless you go in effect zero emissions. Now, what about towing and range concerns? This text here literally says nothing, so I've just put nothing speak. The reality is, and I know because I've done the testing here, and many other people have done the testing, I've talked to some of these guys, so I know this. Energy density means that EVs cannot come close to diesel 4x4 range, towing or not. And I've done quite a bit of work on this. I'm not going to make this video longer by going into all that detail now. That is a fact. Then we hear other countries have NVES schemes, therefore we should have one. Again, let's look at the detail. Almost all advanced economies except Australia and Russia. Of course, you mentioned Russia because, you know, international barrier, why the hell not? But the others have one, doesn't consider Australia's vehicle usage. Let me give you an example. So European speed limits are 120 k's an hour. They have speed limits. Should we adopt 120 k's an hour just because the Europeans have it? Well, maybe we should. I probably wouldn't be against that. But the point being, you can't just say they have X, therefore we should have X. It's how that's implemented. And to be honest, I have no problem with an emissions scheme. I have a problem with how this one is implemented, and there's a big difference. So another claim you often hear is that we are a dumping ground for high emitting vehicles. Yes, that is true. And the reason we are is because we don't have that standard. I think we should have a standard, just not this one. So what does NVES mean for you? Well, diesel utes, four-wheel drive sports cars, basically anything non-EV will become progressively more expensive. And I think the intent of all of this is to force people into electric vehicles. But unfortunately, there's no mainstream options. We'll look at that more in a sec. So what can you do? Well, at the moment, you can simply just pay more for your four-wheel drive. You can get an EV at some point and do what you can with it, or you can just wait for realistic EV 4x4s to come onto the market. Now, is there actually an EV four-wheel drive at the moment? Well, yes and no. So we've got the Ford F-150, $250,000. We've got the LDV ET60, which is actually only two-wheel drive, EV9, which is really an SUV. So there's no equivalent to something like the Land Cruiser, the Fortuner Prado, or the Ranger, that sort of thing. Coming soon, however, we do have new utes on the way from Isuzu, Kia and JAC to name, but a few there will be more. Don't know when, how expensive or anything else at this point. But here's the base problem, irrespective of what's coming on the market. At the moment, EVs as four-wheel drives actually have many advantages over petrol and diesel. They are great on-road, off-road, they can tow really well, albeit short. The storage is great, reliability is good because they're simple. There's many different reasons to love EVs as a four-wheel drive. But the disadvantages are they are presently very expensive. The range is actually a real problem. There's limited choice, and the charging infrastructure out in remote locations or even holiday areas is going to be a real issue. And the problem with ranges, that's due to battery density. It's not due to a cost thing. Batteries simply do not exist which have the energy levels at a weight level to be able to allow an EV four-wheel drive to do the job of a diesel. Now that's going to change with the advent of things like solid state batteries, etc., but right at the moment that is the case. Now for sports cars it looks a little bit better. There's no question about their speed, they handle well. They are more expensive, there's a limited choice. Charging is less of a problem for sports cars than four-wheel drives towing all over the place. There's no manual transmission or noise, which is, me as a purist, I don't really like that, but you know, is what it is. Now let's talk about fit for purpose. We have a Fiat 500 petrol runabout that could easily be replaced by an electric equivalent if all you want to do is go around the suburbs, the occasional interstate trip. I don't see a problem with that. But what if we got that driver to use an electric motorbike? They would say, well, that doesn't suit for me. It can't take enough load. It's too short range. It's just not going to suit my lifestyle. It's not what I want to do with the car. So diesel Ranger, electric F-150, same sort of thing, doesn't meet the need. So let's not force people into electric vehicles when there isn't an electric vehicle which fits their need. And let's get cleaner. We should all care about the environment. We should all look to reduce pollutants and emissions, but let's do that by encouraging low emission vehicles, not by punishing high emission vehicles, and then naturally things will start to move that way towards a cleaner, greener car environment. So what else could happen with the future of NVES? Well, this is my speculation here. Let's say that we all end up driving things like Rivian's EV four-wheel drives. Well, in the future, potentially, we could have a penalty for larger batteries. Say any EV with a battery larger than 70 kilowatt hours starts to have some form of tax, or maybe there's some form of tax on extra kilowatt hours. So again, the more energy you use per kilometre, the greater the tax. So potentially this isn't the end of NVES. It could even follow us into electric vehicles until everyone is driving something like this Aptera here, which again, not fit for everyone's purpose. So in summary then, the NVES is a scheme to shift Australia towards EVs by making non-EVs progressively and quite rapidly more expensive. You should prepare to pay more for anything which isn't an EV, both new and of a flow down to the second-hand market. And right at the moment, there isn't an EV four-wheel drive alternative to something like a Ranger or Land Cruiser. But battery tech will need a step change, and we need to massively improve charging infrastructure all the way around the country, away from the capital cities. So I believe that we should be moving to a cleaner world. We should be moving to more efficient vehicles, but let's not do that by forcing people into vehicles when they've got no alternative vehicle that will fit their needs. Thanks for watching. Looking forward to the comments.